Hello, I am taking on a challenge to beat every playable Nintendo-published game. Welcome to the next episode. The next game is Punch-Out for the arcade. Looking at Nintendo's catalog so far, most of the games have been developed by Nintendo's two internal development teams, R&D1 and R&D2, often with help from external programming companies. Punch-Out, the next game we're looking at, was made by a new development team in Nintendo R&D3. This team was led by Genyo Takeda, who had worked alongside Yokoi and Uemura on the Laser Clay shooting system back in 1971. While R&D3 would eventually be known for designing Nintendo's home consoles, they also made a handful of games during their early days, often making games with an appeal to more Western audiences, such as the Punch-Out series and the Star Tropics series. While Takeda was the lead designer of the game, Miyamoto once again designed the characters of this one, and we really get to see his design shine in this game. There is a lot of personality here, and each boxer you face off against is brimming with character. While developing this one, Nintendo had an oversupply of screens due to overspending after the success of Donkey Kong. To find a usage for all these screens, they decided to make the machine with two screens instead of just one. One would be used for the gameplay, and the other would be used to display the stats. It's wild to me just how long Nintendo's been doing dual screens for their games. Both the Game & Watch and now their arcade machines have utilized this concept well before the DS and Wii U. This one ended up being very successful for Nintendo, particularly in the US, and it was one of the highest performing arcade games in 1984 there. It spawned a handful of sequels, and is easily Nintendo R&D3's most popular series. After putting your coins in and choosing a name, you are thrown straight into the action. In this game, you play as an unnamed challenger with green hair. Some people speculate that this might be Little Mac from the sequel on the NES, but it's not really clear. He doesn't really look like Little Mac, although that could just be because they hadn't settled on a design for him yet. Immediately when starting, we hear voice acting for the first time in this challenge. The announcer introduces the fighter you are up against, and he continues to shout out the various moves you perform.
Ladies and gentlemen, Glass Joe!
His voice is pretty compressed, and he talks often, which I found to be pretty funny.
Body blow! Body blow! Body blow!
I couldn't even tell what he was saying at times. Anyway, your first opponent, like in the NES version, is Glass Joe from Paris, France. If you play the NES version, a lot of the controls here are the same. You can guard either above or below you, and there are two buttons for hitting, one for the left fist and one for the right fist. If you punch while blocking high, your character will go for a blow to the head. If you punch while you are aiming low, you aim for the body instead. You can also dodge left and right, although there's no way to do a crouch dodge in this one. While a lot of these controls are similar to the NES version, something about the timing seemed really weird to me in this game, and I never could quite figure it out. It's hard to describe. My inputs just never seemed to come out quite when I expected them to, and something about the controls just felt a bit clunky. You do get a bit more used to it as you play though, so if you ever decide to pick this one up, I definitely recommend giving it a bit of time to click before you give up on it. One final mechanic is that landing punches will fill up a meter, while getting hit and missing punches decreases the meter. If it fills up, you get access to two new types of strong punches, hooks and uppercuts, each of which can be performed by pushing a third button while your hands are either up or down. These punches are stronger, although they come out a bit slower. Additionally, I think there might be some extra benefits to using these punches when you knock your opponent down, but I never really found out for sure if that was the case. One of the nice things about these attacks is that your opponent will typically not block the first one of these you throw, so when you fill up your KO meter, you can typically get a pretty easy hit in. Alright, that's all the main mechanics. This first guy is the infamously easy Glass Joe. Surely I can beat him on my first try, right? Well, as I said before, the timing of the controls take a bit to get used to, and I got destroyed by the guy. After he knocked me down twice, I was KO'd. Glass Joe then walked up to the screen and mocked me, which was pretty humiliating. Thankfully, this game does give you one shot at a rematch, and while that doesn't mean much during this first fight, this was very helpful as I progressed through the game. Unfortunately, I lost to him again on my second attempt. Yeesh, this is gonna be a tough one, isn't it? On my next run, I was doing a bit better, but then something else happened. I ran out of time. In each fight, you have 3 minutes to knock your opponent out. If you fail to knock them out in time, you lose the fight, even if you were doing better than your opponent. Finally, during my next run, I realized Glass Joe's weakness. He rarely guards his stomach, and you can usually just win by spamming body blows. After getting enough body blows, my KO meter filled up, and I finished him with some uppercuts. He was KO'd immediately after being knocked down just this one time. Finally, Glass Joe was defeated. Next up was Piston Hurricane, who comes from Cuba. This guy is a bit of a step up from Glass Joe, largely because of a single move he occasionally pulls out. On my first attempt, while I was trying to figure out the best way to fight him, he pulled out his signature move, Hurricane Rush. After backing up a bit, Piston Hurricane comes in and swings constant blows, swapping between body and head blows. Honestly, I never even really figured out a good way to dodge this move, as my eventual strategy would knock him out before he used it. I think the safe strat would be to alternate defensive positions and just block each blow, although it sounds like there might be a way to time some punches against him that prevent him from ever landing a single hit. When he first did this move, I got clobbered by it, and after getting up, he did it almost immediately again and I was KO'd. Every time the announcer's count reaches 0, you have to hear this awful honking sound, and boy did it make the losses feel even worse. That honk noise is awful! My next attempt didn't go any better, and I lost to him again. Whenever you lose your second life, you are sent all the way back to the beginning, and you have to beat everyone all over again from the start. Thankfully, I pretty quickly realized that you could beat Piston Hurricane in a very similar way to Glass Joe. Spam body blows for a while, then finish him with a KO punch. Similar to Glass Joe, if you manage to knock down Piston Hurricane without taking much damage, he stays down and you can get an early victory on him. I was typically able to use this strat to knock him down before I even saw his special move. While they started to get tougher from here on out, it was nice that I found a consistent easy way through the fights I would be repeating the most often. Next up was Bald Bull, who hails from Istanbul, Turkey. If you've played the NES title, you may recognize his signature move, the Bull Charge. Bald Bull backs up, hops towards you, and knocks you down in a single hit. If you don't learn how to counter this move, Bald Bull will destroy you, which for me, he initially did. He knocked me down twice with this move and finished me off with a nasty uppercut, and it was back to the beginning for me. While you can simply dodge the Bull Charge, if you manage to throw a punch to his head at just the right time during his charge, you'll knock him down regardless of how much life he has left. The timing is pretty precise though, and it took me a while to get good at it. Eventually, I was able to use audio cues to get pretty consistent at the timing. Getting this easy knockdown makes the fight much easier, although I still generally had to learn how to dodge his normal swings and punish them to get good at the rest of the fight too. It took me a few tries, and while I still didn't totally have the timing down for the Bull Charge yet, I managed to beat Bald Bull and face off against the next challenger, Kid Quick from Brooklyn, New York. This guy is one of the few characters from this game that never appeared in any future Punch-Out titles. While I think his portrait looks fine, the eyes on the actual fighter look a bit derpy. This guy was really tough for me. He didn't leave his gut open like Glass Joe and Piston Hurricane, and he didn't have a move where I could knock him out in one hit like I could with Bald Bull. I lost a ton to this guy, and I just couldn't figure him out. Eventually though, I found a strat that worked. If you went for punches to the right of his face, he would often dodge and follow up with an attack that you could easily dodge and punish. He wouldn't always follow up with this same slow punch, but if you kept going for it, I found this to be a pretty consistent strat for this guy. I even eventually got so good at him that I could often win after a single knockdown if I managed to keep full health for the entire fight. Of course, the first time I beat him was a bit more sloppy, but on my 15th run through the game, I finally managed to take him out. Next up was the ridiculously named Pizza Pasta, who, you guessed it, came from Italy.
His name is Pizza Pasta!
This is another fighter that never left the arcades, although some people speculate if Aaron Ryan from Super Punch-Out was based on him due to him having a similar moveset. Honestly, I didn't find this guy nearly as bad as Kid Quick. The most unique move he had was one where he ran up, crouched in front of you for a while, then threw out an uppercut at you. This caught me off guard at first, but I eventually found out that since you can't move while he's crouched in front of you, you can simply hold left or right, which will cause you to automatically dodge the uppercut as soon as you regain control of your character. After dodging the hook, you could punish him with a ton of punches too. So not only was this move easy to dodge, you can do some serious damage to him every time he throws it out. The rest of the fight is not so bad either, and I was generally able to use a similar strat as Kid Quick, where I would bait an attack with a swing, dodge, and then punish. Every now and then, he seemed to enter this state that was much more difficult, and he would start throwing fast jabs out like crazy, but usually by this point, I was doing well enough to squeeze out a victory. I only lost one run to this guy, and I managed to beat him on the next run after. With that, there was only one fight left, the champion of the world, Mr. Sandman from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This guy is brutal. He swings hard, and he's got a few different types of punches that you need to learn the timing to. The worst is an uppercut that he prepares for with the crouch, and this one hits hard. While I managed to get quite a few hits on him during my first run, he ultimately still destroyed me. Part of what made this so tough was that I had so many opponents to face before I could even challenge this guy, so it was really hard to get enough time to even learn his moves. When it came down to it, this fight was largely about getting good at dodging his swings and countering with a punish. However, as I started to get better, I noticed something. As I got further along in the fight, I would ultimately end up getting timed out. Eventually, I realized that once you filled up your KO meter, Mr. Sandman wouldn't throw nearly as many punches at you. During this time, if you went for a punch instead, he would dodge and counter faster than you could regain control and dodge yourself. To avoid taking this damage, I would just sit there waiting forever for him to finally throw out a punch, which wasn't a fast enough strategy. Eventually, I had an idea on how to deal with this. Whenever I get my KO punch, throw it out immediately to get the free hit, then throw one out again and immediately take damage. This would cause me to quickly lose my KO punch, which makes him throw out more attacks once again. As long as I was doing good enough during the rest of the fight, I could do this every time I got the KO punch, and I would just have to tank the hits. I came up with this idea on my 26th attempt through the game, and it seemed like it was working, although having to tank the hits was brutal. After 2 minutes, we had both gone down once, meaning I only had a minute left to knock him down 2 more times and get a guaranteed KO. I was able to knock him down a second time after only 20 seconds, meaning I still had 40 seconds to knock him down one last time. This was doable, but I was starting to get really nervous. It was close, but with 11 seconds left, I managed to knock him down a third time and finally win the fight. After this, your character victoriously holds up the champion's belt. Ah, what a satisfying victory. You can actually keep going after this, and you'll continuously defend your title from each of the boxers you fought before. The fights aren't exactly the same though, and they get much tougher from here on out. Since this part of the game is essentially endless, I was content with earning the title belt as a good enough goal for the game. Oh, and for some reason, during this time, your character's body changes from green to yellow. Not sure why that is. With that, Punch-Out for the arcade was complete. On to the review. I thought this one was pretty solid, and definitely one of the best arcade games I've played up until this point. The fights are challenging, but it is a lot of fun to learn the patterns and improve at the fights. The game really tests your reaction skills too, and up until this point, this was probably the hardest game I had played so far. The game is also brimming with character. Each fighter feels very unique, and you can tell they put a lot of effort into each boxer to make them stand out. I still have a few issues with the game though, largely due to the controls not feeling responsive, especially at first. It's frustrating when you get punished due to you pushing a button just a hair too early, causing it not to be registered at all. You could just call this a skill issue, but I personally thought it just hampered the experience in the end. Additionally, I wish the game gave you more continues, as it got pretty tiring doing those same opening fights again and again. Learning the fights is fun, but it's hard to improve when you have so little time to spend on a fight during each run. The fun aspects of the game more than make up for these complaints though, and I gave the game a final score of 7 out of 10. It may feel a bit rough to fans who started with the NES version, but I recommend giving this one some time to click if you like games that provide a good challenge. Thanks for watching the video. If you want to see more of these in the future, make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you won't miss out on the next one. Also leave a like if you enjoyed it, since it will help the channel grow and motivate me to continue this series. I hope I will see you in the next step of my quest to beat every Nintendo game.